And just in terms of how I'm going to present this afternoon to you, I want to give you a little bit of background to the MMIAH project, and just let you know who the project partners are and how the project operates, and then show you how this Interreg project has very direct benefits for a heritage asset in Cork, and that is Elizabeth Fort, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And we'll take it from there. So just very, very briefly, MMIAH stands for, as I said, Recovery and Valorisation of Maritime, Military and Industrial Heritage. It's kind of Eurospeak for revitalising, as Liam has very, very kindly put it for me, revitalising disused or heritage assets that are within these coastal Atlantic cities that have maybe gone out of use or out of public knowledge or public memory. And what the project aims to do is to actually invest in these assets and show how they can become socially and economically viable places within those cityscapes. Now, for each of the partners that are involved in the projects, we have a very, very different and broad canvas of assets, heritage assets that we're working on, and that our budgets are being used for. But in the case of Cork, we are focusing on Elizabeth Fort. One of the ultimate aims of this project is to actually produce a blueprint and produce a white paper actually on how these assets can be successfully and sustainably be reintroduced into the cityscapes as well. So you can see the four main principles of the project, and the partners that we're working with are spread right around the Atlantic coast. So in Ireland we have two project partners. We have Cork City Council and Limerick City Council and County Council. In the UK we're working with Plymouth City Council and Liverpool City Region. In France we're working with Normandy and La Rochelle, which is located about halfway down the French coast. In Spain, our project partners are in Ferrol, which is right up in the northwest tip of the country, and right down at the southern tip of Spain in Cadiz. And then we have one Portuguese project partner, and they are in Ilhavo in Portugal. So how did we actually land the project? Well, from the Cork City Council point of view, this project was actually born in the Strategic Planning and Economic Development Directorate. So our Architectural Conservation Officer, Pat Ruan, worked with our EU project officer when the second call for projects under this Interreg programme was announced. And they looked at the terms that were there and decided that yes, we have a project that would fit very neatly into this, and the project had its focus around Elizabeth Fort. The council had already had a number of proposals and a number of projects in place for Elizabeth Fort, so it was thought that this project, this Interreg project, was a good natural fit for what the council were actually working on as well. But ultimately this project has a tourism goal, and it is to increase the tourism potential of Elizabeth Fort in Cork City. So our project has moved directorates. It's moved from the planning directorate into corporate and external affairs. So that's where I'm based with them. In terms of the money that's involved in the project, you can see that the total project value is just over 3 million, and the ERDF, so the EU funding element of that, is about 2.5 million, and the remainder of that project value is made up of the contribution from each of the local authorities or each of the entities that's involved in this project. So you can see that just over 822,000 is the contribution from the local authorities around Atlantic Europe. And the breakdown of that funding for Cork, so you can see the Cork City Council contribution, so what Cork is actually paying into this project over 3 years is €76,000, nearly €77,000, and then we have €230,000 from the EU. So you can see the total value of this project for Cork is €307,500, which looks like a great big pot of money. But you'll see as we work our way along that that money is actually earmarked into very specific areas, and there are very specific rules about how that budget can actually be used. as shown here. So you can see that when you break down the €307,500, the staff costs are 159, nearly 160,000. I do want to point out that that is not my wage over the 3 years. There's actually a number of people in Cork City Council who are involved in this project. So from Director of Service through City Archaeologists, Heritage Officers, and a lot of people actually contributing towards it. And the way that Cork City Council's contribution is made up is actually, in some respects, made up of benefit in kind. So the staff hours of everybody involved in the project is actually contributed towards the Cork aspect of the funding. You can see it's actually a fixed budget for office and admin expenditure. It's 23, nearly 24,000. Which seems like a phenomenal amount of money, but there's absolutely nothing we can do about that. That is a fixed budget. It's the same across every interreg project. It's a percentage of the overall project cost. €14,500 has been allocated towards travel and accommodation. It's one of the really difficult tasks of the job is that I have to visit each of the project partners around Atlantic Europe for the steering committee meetings. So there's a nice budget set aside for that. External services are for when we bring on board consultants to actually undertake some of the actions of each of the work packages of the project. We don't have any money allocated in the budget towards equipment because we don't need any. So you can see that that is the breakdown of our project budget. And how the project actually works. Well, as with every interreg project, there are a number of work packages, and on all interreg projects, the first 3 work packages are the same. So the package work WP1 is project coordination, WP2 is communication, and WP3 is capitalisation. And by capitalisation, we mean building on the work that has been done already in specific areas. So the work packages 4 to 7 are specifically geared towards this heritage project. There's a very complex delivery system for reporting and for budget drawdown. You can see, if you look at the chart that's there, what happens is if I engage a subcontractor, they will report directly to me. I then have to go on to the first level controller, get approval for them to work on it. We obviously are bound by procurement rules as well. So there's a very, in some ways it seems convoluted, but in other ways the auditing trail is very, very clear for the project, and there's complete transparency in the way that the money is actually spent and used by each of the project partners. To date on this project, our project started officially in July 2017, so we're just over a year into the project at the moment. We've had our first pay claim just paid last week, and we're in the process of organising our second pay claim. It takes about 6 months to actually have the pay claims approved. So this is why it's very important that the local authority actually has the financial capacity to manage and maintain these projects as they're going on, because it does take an inordinate amount of time for the payment claims to actually be processed and approved and paid. It's, as I say, a process of about 6 months or so. So just to give you a flavour of some of the work packages that are involved, these are work packages 4 to 7, and they're the packages that we're actively working on at the moment. So in green at the top, the first 2 lines, you can see there that the task, that's work package 4, it's the design of the methodology for the analysis and evolutionary study of the cities. So for each of the 9 cities involved in the project, each of them will produce this evolutionary study. Now again, it's a bit of a Eurospeak word, but it's basically looking at the origins of the city and analysing how this asset fits into the city as we see it in the present day. And then we take that a step further, and we'll actually, in work package 6, we will develop master and director plans for each of the assets that have been chosen. Just to give you a flavour of some of the heritage assets that are involved, or the projects that are involved in the MIAH project. So for our project, I mentioned we're dealing with Elizabeth Fort. It's a military fortification in the middle of the city. In Limerick, the focus will be on the reconversion of a barge, a river barge. In Liverpool, the team are looking at the next phase of development of Albert Docks, and they're also responsible, with our input, Liverpool are responsible for actually drafting and writing the white paper that will be the result of this project. In Plymouth, they have a fantastic project which involves the conservation of 15 ships' figureheads, and they're going to be the centrepiece of the new Naval and Maritime Museum. It's called a museum that's called the Box, in the middle of Plymouth City. And in Normandy, the team will be working on the reconversion of a Sherman tank that's been left over from World War II. And they'll also look at some interventions in the conservation of a blast furnace, which was used in World War II as well. In La Rochelle, I think they're looking at conservation work on a ship. And in both Ferrol and Cadiz in Spain, they're both looking at coastal military fortifications. So in Ferrol, I think it's the fort of San Sebastian, and a similar fort in Cadiz as well. So all of those projects will fit under our work package 6, which you can see is the blue one that's outlined here, pilot interventions for the reconversion and adaptation to new uses of selected MMIAH assets. But along with that work package, so we have in Cork, we have a total of 60,000 to work on Elizabeth Fort, but there are other small actions that are involved in those work packages as well. So, and they're very exciting because it means that there is actually funding allocated to do little projects that might not otherwise be accomplished within the City Council. So I'll move on to talk a little bit about that. That's WP4. Sorry, go back there for a second. In Elizabeth Fort this year, as part of our Heritage Week celebrations, we actually ran a live geophysical survey. So we were able to actually do a GPR survey of the fort interior as well, and I'll show you some images of that in just a moment. So Elizabeth Fort itself is a star-shaped fort that's based, it's located on Barrack Street in Cork City. People who are familiar with Cork will know it's just off the end of the South Mall, and the permission or the grant for the building of the fort was given in the late 1500s, but it wasn't actually until about 1601 that building work on the fort actually began. And it was built on the site of a medieval parish church, so the medieval parish church of St Mary del Nard, and that was incorporated within the fort structure for some time. But you can see that over time, the morphology and the sort of the layout of the fort actually changed until we see later on in the 18th century that the fort was adapted to the layout that we would recognise today. It was the site of a number of military barracks as well, and we can see that through mapping they're actually quite well documented and quite well charted, but what we're not actually sure about is the location of the medieval parish church within the fort. And so our GPR survey earlier this year was designed to actually try to attempt to locate any remains of that structure within the fort interior. And you can see just throughout time, there's actually very little change within it until the 20th century, when we had, at the beginning of the 20th century, we had the development of a new and the current range of buildings that are there, and those buildings were actually used as a Garda training college, and there was Garda housing on the site as well. And a very interesting development at the fort in the last year or so is the fact that the Irish Landmark Trust have now taken over 2 of those former Garda barracks houses, and they've developed them as visitor accommodation. And they're opening, I think, next week or the week after. So very exciting developments in terms of the fort's usage. That's how the fort looks pretty much at the present day. So you can see towards the bottom of the image, you can see there's the L-shaped range of the former Garda buildings. The last two buildings, as part of one of the work packages that I will be working on, some of the €60,000 that we have to spend on Elizabeth Fort will be used for the reconversion of two more of the rooms, two more of the buildings in the fort. And in those buildings we will put a map room which will show the story of Elizabeth Fort through time, and we will also have some displays as well, just to show what the former uses of the fort actually were as well. And we'll also put in place a permanent display of the GPR results, that the survey, geophysical survey work that we did earlier this year too. So in terms of the background to how Elizabeth Fort was chosen for this project, I mentioned that Cork City Council had earmarked work at Elizabeth Fort over the last 15 years, so actually more, nearly 20 years. So you can see that there was a Historic Centre action plan prepared, and it proposed upgrading the Historic City Centre of Cork, and it included plans for Elizabeth Fort, very worthy plans for the most part. It recommended the redevelopment of Elizabeth Fort as a tourist facility. Now, at the time, the Garda station was still there. There were still guards living at the site, and it was actually not handed over to City Council, or City Council didn't take ownership of it until 2014. And in the intervening time, then the Office of Public Works were the main agency involved in the maintenance and the upkeep of the site. In 1997, the feasibility study was prepared for the redevelopment of Elizabeth Fort and the area surrounding it, and they proposed that the former Garda station buildings should be reused on the site. There have been 6 main actions on the site since 1999. So the Office of Public Works, you can see, did extensive repair works to the fort structure between 2003 and 2006. And they also erected interpretive panels at the entrance to the fort in 2008. I think one of the most successful interventions has actually been the installation of an elevated walkway around the fort interior, which allows people to actually have one of the best views out over Cork City that I think you could have. So for visitors coming in, that's very definitely a highlight of the visitor experience to Elizabeth Fort. They were opened officially to the public in 2014. There was free entry to the site, and Cork City Council also provided a guided tour service at the site. This year, a nominal charge for that guided tour service was introduced, and I think that's a very worthwhile and a very viable means of ensuring the fort's economic sustainability as well. It's a nominal fee, it's only €2, and there's been massive uptake on it as well. So we've gone from 0 visitors to the fort in 2014 to almost 70,000 this year. So we're hoping now with this project to invest money at Elizabeth Fort and capitalise on those visitors, those growing visitor numbers. The access to the fort has been upgraded by Cork City Council. They've invested €150,000 at the entrance to the fort, and just last year the Conservation Assessment Report by David Kelly Partnership and Margaret Quinlan Architects, that plan was finalised. So all of the tools are in place to actually ensure that the redevelopment of the fort can progress as it should. And Dave, I see, Dave Pollock worked on that Conservation Assessment Report, and it's a very fine plan. So I've talked already about Medieval Day at Elizabeth Fort. That's an annual event that's held at the fort. It's the Irish Walltown Network and the Heritage Council sponsored the event. City archaeologist Ciara Brett manages that event every year, and this year we dovetailed along with that event, and we did our live geophysical survey, and the results of that will go on permanent display. In terms of the rest of the budget of the 60,000 for Elizabeth Fort, we are intending to introduce audio guides at the site, and tourist brochures. We will invest in corporate branding at the site, tour guide training, and the exhibition interpretation framework. We will invest in that as well. €5,000 will be invested in renovations of the 2 rooms at the fort, where we will be able to actually install the map room and the archaeology room on the site. So that is in brief what we are doing at Elizabeth Fort over the next 2 years. We're very grateful that we've been given the funding and the opportunity to actually carry out this work. It may not necessarily have been conducted without the Interreg project. So there is an economic value in being involved in these Interreg projects or European projects. And lastly, thank you very much for listening.